Everyone has seen videos of Karens screaming at innocent people, but this is what happens when Karens try to fight cops.
Drop the knife now.
No.
Step out of the car.
Get your hands off it.
I have to go to work. I don't have time for this, sir.
On March 19, 2023, in Marshfield, Wisconsin, a 911 call was received from a female requesting an officer's assistance, but refusing to offer any information as to what was going on.
Nothing. I have to go to work. I don't even know why you guys are here. Get away from me, please. You're making me feel I want the chief of police here. Okay. Whoever the supervisor is, I want here.
Okay, he's coming.
In the background of the call, there was the sound of a male shouting. So the officers expected some sort of domestic violence dispute.
I don't have time for this, sir. I have to go to work.
So you called in?
No, I didn't. I don't know who called you. Okay. I didn't call you.
What's your phone number?
The call was later traced to this very apartment that the officers are knocking on the door of.
I'm from New Hampshire. Well, I'm from Massachusetts originally.
Okay, so who's in the apartment with you?
Me.
Okay, who else?
Me.
As soon as this woman opens the door, she begins yelling at the officers that she has to go to work.
Go to work.
We got her.
I have to go to work.
We got a call.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh.
Okay.
For some reason, however, she answers a phone call while in the process of talking with police officers. And it turns out to be one of the officers testing her story. After that, she appears to get quite flustered because she was caught in the lie.
So that's the number that called 911.
I actually have two different numbers on my phone.
That's the number that called 911.
Oh, you're right, it was.
They needed some help.
Okay.
So that's why we're here.
I have to go to work, y'all. I have to go to work. I have to go to work. I have to go to work. I'm not talking to you. I'm not speaking to you. I have to go to work.
Who else is inside?
The police still have to check the situation out, as it can be likely in domestic abuse cases that the spouse has sent her out to make the police think everything is okay.
I have to go to work. You guys are going to cause me to lose my job. Please let me go to work. There's no one inside. Please let me go home. Please, I have to go to work.
What the fuck are you doing?
Oh my God, stop!
Get the fuck away from her!
Yes,
Get over
stop!
here! Get the fuck away from her! Get on the
Oh my
ground!
God!
Get on the ground!
Get down! Oh my God! My baby's in there! My baby's in there! No, I'm sorry, I'm sorry! My baby! Guys, please!
Stop!
I'm not doing anything! Guys, baby, please! He's in the bathroom, guys, in the bathroom! Please go get...
It was discovered that she was lying about nobody being inside. The man who opened the door did so very forcefully and was then tased by the officers, likely because they felt like he was going to be a threat going forward. That being said, however, this feels like a massive overreaction by the officers to me, as at this point he realized it was the police, he did have his hands up. Second, she then begins to claim that her baby is inside the apartment. A lot happened in a very short amount of time.
Officer! I can't breathe! He just tased my boyfriend for no reason!
You need to calm down.
No, I can't breathe! No!
You're gonna go up?
I can't! Go!
This woman, who would later be identified as Kayla, becomes incredibly angry when she's forced to leave the apartment building.
Go outside.
Oh my God! I can't believe this!
I gotta adjust this cuff too before.
Okay, hold on.
I just tightened down when she was pulling.
Hold on 1 second.
I want to lose my apartment!
No, you are
Fuck
yelling.
you! Fuck you!
Started arguing in the police car. I didn't do anything.
Brandon's your first name, right?
Yes,
Brandon,
sir.
all we had to do was talk about that, right?
Okay.
That's all we wanted to do when we came here. Can we sit you up?
Can you take the taser out of my leg,
Yeah,
please?
we want to sit you up though so you're not laying on it, okay?
Guys, I didn't do anything wrong.
But
You came out tense up at us, man. You can't be doing
come
that.
out with your fist.
I
ready
didn't
to
leave
go.
my apartment. I did not leave my apartment.
You did, but
Her boyfriend, identified as Brandon, goes on the defensive pretty quickly, claiming that he never left his apartment. The truth of the matter, if you rewatch the clip, is that he did in fact step out of the apartment with his hands balled into fists, looking like he wanted to fight.
Just lost his job.
Alright.
He just lost his job. I can't afford to lose my job. Please help me. Please. Please. Guys. Please. Please. I'm gonna lose my job.
Have a seat in here.
I'm gonna lose my job. Please don't. Please, I'm not gonna run. Why would you guys handcuff me? I wasn't running.
Okay,
listen. You called 911. Just listen, all right? All right?
I called 911 because he was being a douchebag. I was just trying to threaten him with the fucking cops.
She just wanted to threaten him by calling the cops. This is, of course, illegal.
Okay, that's inappropriate, first of all, right?
I understand that, but
Okay.
he wasn't doing anything, and I wasn't doing anything.
Okay, you got every police officer over here because we thought someone was being murdered, beat up, and...
No, I'm fine. You guys did all of
And
this.
when we
He
show up-
thought that you were hurting me. Of course he came out here to help me. He thought you guys were hurting me.
Okay, you called
You
911.
just tased him.
The false report of a crime is a first-degree misdemeanor punishable by up to 1 year in jail or 12 months of probation, as well as a fine of up to $1,000.
Oh, please. I have to
Put your legs inside.
Sir, I have
Put
to
your legs inside
I'm
the vehicle.
trying to talk to you like a normal
Put
person.
your legs inside the vehicle.
Please, talk to me.
No, put your legs inside the vehicle right now.
Can you please talk to me?
No, put your legs
Can you
inside.
put the window down?
We can roll the window down.
Can I please be in the know? I want to know what's happening. Guys, please. I have to work. I'm under arrest.
Yep.
You're
Why?
under arrest for obstructing an officer, first of all.
I'm going to jail?
No, you're not going to jail. You're under...
She keeps bringing up the fact that she needs to go to work or she's going to lose her job. The police are under no obligation to do anything to help her keep her job. They're doing their job by arresting her, and it's up to her to figure out her own situation once everything is cleared up.
You called 911 and...
I didn't do anything, sir.
Yes, you did.
So I'm gonna lose the work at noon. Please.
Put your leg in.
Put your leg in or you will go to jail. Put your leg in the car. No, you're going...
All right, no,
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Put your-
please, can you
put
put
your
the
leg
window
in-
down, please?
Put your leg in the car.
Please put the window down a little
Put
bit.
your leg in the car.
It's just a little bit.
The officers eventually managed to close the car door and get everything sorted out. Kayla was indeed arrested and eventually charged with resisting or obstructing an officer, as well as disorderly conduct. Her trial is very likely taking place soon, so subscribe and I'll keep you updated on what happens. This next case is a wild ride.
You guys messed up my flight ticket.
What's going on?
They messed up my flight ticket. I asked for an aisle. They gave me a middle seat. How is that my problem?
Okay. So, this is all about the seat thing, okay? So did they ask you to talk to you about anything about changing seats?
I told them. Then the girls let me sit where I wanted to sit.
that your bag, yeah?
And then they took me
we'll
off
talk.
the plane.
Okay.
But I walked
Sure.
off allowing. They did not arrest me. They did not handcuff me.
Okay, I'm
They
here
did not touch me to
trying
get off
figure
the
out what's
plane.
going on. So nobody... That
They
doesn't...
need to let me, either they need to buy me a hotel ticket and get me
Okay.
back to New York, or they need to let me aboard the plane.
This woman, named Jaclyn Flurry, seems to be quite angry about not getting the seat that she so desperately wanted on board her flight to Alaska. At this point, she hasn't been arrested, but she was removed from the plane after she failed to move to her own assigned seat.
And you
Because
could-
I already boarded the plane.
Okay. So, we'll figure out from them what's going on.
Okay, we'll
But
figure out, because
right
she doesn't
now,
understand English
hey,
too well.
we're here for, like, your behavior, okay?
My behavior?
Yeah.
Okay,
There's-
I got a plane for the aisle seat. They gave me an E, which is a middle seat.
Jaclyn claims that the seat she received wasn't what she paid for. It's unclear exactly what she means by that because most airliners do cost extra for the ability to pick your own seat.
That is not
You
what I
have your
paid
ID?
for.
You have your ID?
What does that have to do with anything?
Because right now the police are here. We're going to find out the who, the why, the what. So I just need to know
Okay,
who
well,
you
you
are.
better.
Yeah. Okay.
But her overall behavior and demeanor suggest that it might be the case that she believes she's entitled to an aisle seat, even though she didn't pay for it or pick it ahead of time.
Good. Alright, so on your side, you requested a seat, you didn't get that seat, and now that's what I'm trying, like, we're here. Did you walk off the plane? They say, like, let's get off the plane. Are you flying anymore?
I'm going to Alaska. I'm going to Seattle, and then I'm going to Alaska.
Quick.
All right.
No, I'm trying to listen to you.
You don't need to right now.
I need to. It's my privilege.
Good, it's your privilege.
Okay, thank you. So don't tell me what I cannot and cannot
Sit down,
do.
sit down, sit down. Okay?
Now.
Sit
No,
down.
I would like to hear what people are saying.
Just have a seat.
You can have a conversation.
I am allowed to hear what they are
You can right there,
saying.
because I'm going to catch up with you.
Okay.
How is that thin ice? What have I done?
Well, they're
Seriously,
trying to work
what
with
have
I'm going to double
I
check.
done?
Now go with me. He's going to go
What
talk
have
to
I
them
done
then.
on the plane?
Well,
I would like to ask
side.
you what I have done on the plane.
I listened to your side, and I listened to their
I'm not
side.
asking you about my side. I'm asking you what I have done on the plane. Did I touch someone? Did I touch someone?
So what was your name,
Please
Jaclyn?
explain it. Have I spoken to someone? Did I touch someone?
Okay, here's the
Please
deal.
tell me if I've spoken to someone and I've touched someone.
Okay, so
She continuously asks, "What have I done?" when it's generally quite obvious. At this point in time, we don't know whether or not she or the airline were in the right. It could very well be the case that they screwed her out of a seat that she paid for. But there is a reasonable expectation of courtesy while in public that she seems to believe doesn't apply to herself. She also refuses to sit down when the officers ask her to because they're trying to control the situation. If she is in the right here, then she's only making the situation harder on herself.
Jaclyn, okay? We're going to walk out because you
I
are
don't
not a
live
Delta
here.
passenger.
I don't know anyone here.
You're
If
not a
anything,
Delta
I need to get a
passenger now.
ride back to New York.
Okay, we'll walk you out to where the other airlines are, okay?
Dude, I don't live here.
Delta is denying you service, okay? Delta Airlines, a private company, is denying you service.
Why
We're gonna go to the other
though?
airlines.
Because you guys denied me service. Why? You don't even know why.
Okay,
So
let's
you
walk
better
out.
get me a flight back
Grab
to
your
New
bag.
York.
Okay.
I don't live in Utah.
Jaclyn,
I've never been here.
Jaclyn,
Dude!
walk out. We can work on you.
Where am I
getting to
gonna go?
I can answer those questions, but we're gonna walk
No,
out.
I don't want to go anywhere. Where am I gonna go in Utah?
Jaclyn was just officially denied boarding the airplane, which means she will not be allowed onto the plane under any circumstances. Even though she's a paying customer, all airlines are allowed to deny boarding to anyone who violates what is called their contract of carriage. Generally, this includes a line about being allowed to deny boarding to anyone, quote, disrupting flight operations or engaging in unruly behavior. So even if she was in the right, because of the behavior she exhibited, it's totally legal for them to bar her from the plane, without having to provide accommodations.
I'm gonna go to the other airlines and try booking there, okay?
Dude, are you gonna pay for it?
You're refunded, okay?
Okay, well then get my refund and refund me a ticket back
I
to
don't
New
know.
York.
It's gonna go to your credit card. I
Okay,
clearly don't
well
have
that's
your
on
credit
you
card.
then.
Jaclyn, let's start walking
No,
out.
that's so up.
Jaclyn?
You cannot do that.
The police obviously are under no obligations to pay for this woman's flight back to New York.
They are leaving me homeless. I don't live in Utah.
Jaclyn, at this point, we're helping you to go get rebooked. You keep doing this yelling, we're gonna look at criminal charges, okay? Disorderly conduct.
Dude, this is on you though.
This is not on me, okay?
Yeah, this is on you.
You caused a disturbance. They have deplaned
No,
a plane.
I did not cause a disturbance.
Jaclyn?
Either way, the officers seem to have made the decision that her behavior has become criminally disorderly and are proceeding with the arrest.
Told me I would get an aisle.
Jaclyn?
All right, dude,
they
give me
deflate-
my.
Come here.
Give
come
me
here.
my. I don't
Okay.
do.
Let's go train
Stop!
Come here. Hands behind your back.
Stop!
Hands behind your back. Now. Hands
Stop!
behind your back.
Stop!
Hands behind your back.
Stop! I don't live in Utah.
Stop resisting. Hands behind your
I
back.
don't
Hands
live in
behind your back.
Utah.
Hands behind your back. Stop resisting. Hands behind your back.
Ow! I don't live in
Stop
Utah.
resisting.
Jaclyn was eventually removed from the terminal and taken into police custody. She was eventually charged with assault on a police officer, interference with an arresting officer, and disorderly conduct after request to stop.
True story, you don't know nothing.
True story. I don't know the
That bitch is crazy.
Literally can't make me laugh on camera. You get me in trouble.
Okay, if I'm on camera. That bitch is crazy.
As soon as the officer walks up here, we can tell that he's friendly with the people of the area. They greet him as though he's a friend and tell him that the person in question is absolutely crazy. That person's name is Christina Kabat.
I've been kicked out of a bar already tonight, and you're not.
What did she say? What did she say? They don't like you because you're black here. This is the racist part. I said, I've been coming across.
Said that you were pushing people and touching people and trying to push people off their stools and acting disorderly.
On this night, August 11th, 2021, La Crosse police were dispatched to a downtown bar for trouble with a party. The complaint said that an intoxicated woman was in the bar attacking a bunch of people and refusing to leave.
She's been in the bar for a while.
Just being dumb.
Yeah.
No.
I don't know if you know who she is. She's Tim Kabat.
We all do, yeah.
You all do,
Yep.
I know.
Just, maybe take her to the next city over. Like they
But
do
she's
in
been
Los Angeles.
touching people, pushing people.
She was later identified as the wife of the city's ex-mayor, whose name is Tim Kabat. The real kicker is that this wasn't even the first time that day that Christina had the police called on her. Earlier that day, they were dispatched to a different bar and made contact with her. The issue was the same as it is here. She was heavily intoxicated and refused to leave the bar until the cops were called.
Who's this guy?
His name's Dan.
You know what happened to me.
If I be honest,
What happened to you?
if I be quite honest with you,
You know what happened to me. I'm
if I be
Tim
honest
Flurry.
with you,
It's shown here that this woman has had several run-ins with the police before. She also evidently believes that the entire city is out to get her and her husband, which is a textbook sign of narcissism or paranoia.
I don't know what that has any bearing on tonight's situation. What happened tonight?
Can you explain to him? This town is going to shut Tim and I down everywhere we go because of what happened to me. Because the police department said that I did something wrong. All these white fucking motherfuckers think that I did something wrong.
Okay.
She continues to bring up the fact that the police are white and being white supremacists, but seems not to acknowledge the fact that she is white as well. If what the police were doing was steeped in white supremacy, it's very likely that she would benefit from it rather than being the subject of an investigation.
Hey, Alex, how
I
you doing,
just like
man?
to put in a good word for
buddy.
that lady right there. She's an okay lady.
She's okay?
Yeah, she's an okay lady.
Okay.
Christina just very obviously paid a man to tell the police that she was a good person, while simultaneously using one of the most derogatory slurs possible. She is either inebriated to the point that she doesn't recognize that what she's doing isn't okay, or she simply doesn't care.
This is my job, bro. Bro, this is what you know that.
Yeah, no.
I swear to God.
You're good.
Bro,
You saw that, right?
I do this shit, bro. For real. Thank you.
Ma'am, is it okay if we talk over here for a second?
I do this shit for real, for real.
You come over here and talk to me. And my name is Christina, and you know me.
Christina Kabat was eventually arrested for disorderly conduct and taken into the station. She didn't receive any jail time for this and was released shortly after. Interestingly enough, several years later, in January of 2023, she was attacked with pepper spray at a protest, and many believe that it was related to her inflammatory behavior during this incident. And if you thought this case was shocking, this next Karen beats everything.
Hey, step out of the car right now. Get out of the car. Ma'am, we'll talk about everything, but get out of the car. Yep. 20 expedite, we're in the garage, she's closing. Ma'am, step out.
Excuse me.
Step out.
No, excuse me.
Step out.
Get your hands off of me.
Step out of the car right now.
The woman currently being arrested in her car is Shawn Mullarkey. The arresting officer was dispatched to serve an arrest warrant for a domestic violence allegation, as Mullarkey allegedly hit her ex-husband with a car.
Yes.
No.
Step out of the car.
Get your hands off
Get
of
out of the car.
No.
You're under arrest.
me. No, I am not.
Yes, you are.
Did somebody say that you could come into our house? You don't stop tugging
I'm
me.
gonna tase you if you don't get opener.
No.
Yes.
No.
You're obstructing right now. Do you
No,
understand
you're
that?
obstructing.
I'm not gonna tell you again.
No, I'm not going to tell you again.
Get out of the car right.
After several minutes of resistance, the officer and his newly arrived partner made the call that force was going to be necessary in order to get her out of the car. The audio on their body cams seems to be cut out during this time, and it's unclear whether or not that was a purposeful choice made by the officers or just a technical glitch. Either way, they bring the woman down to the ground to cuff her.
Yes.
step up and be cooperative?
No, my attorney is...
Are you going to stand up and be cooperative?
Are you going to understand that my attorney has filed a motion to quash this?
All right, you just stand your knee.
My attorney has filed a motion to quash this.
Shawn Mullarkey reportedly claims that her attorney has filed a motion to quash this. What she's likely referring to is a motion to quash the arrest warrant currently placed on her, which is a formal request made to a court to declare a specific proceeding invalid. What she doesn't mention is whether or not the motion was successful.
Has filed
We're going out here,
motion
this way.
to quash this.
You hit us, you do anything stupid towards us, and we're adding charges on. If you hit us or anything, let's go.
You've already hit me.
I didn't hit you. I asked you out of the car. I told you you're under arrest. Now you got a whole show for your neighbors here.
This is a textbook demonstration of anxiety. Whenever people like this are arrested and have something brought up to them, they always seem to latch onto the same piece of information and repeat themselves over and over and over again. They are looking for anything that might be able to explain what's going on and how it could not be their fault. So they look for any possible fault in the officer's argument. Generally, it does not come out to sound as intelligent as they may hope.
Hey, I didn't tell you to get out of the car. Stop. Do you have your phone on you?
Don't touch me.
Do you have your phone on you?
Get your fucking hands off me.
Where's your phone?
Do not.
Where's your phone at?
Get your. Do not touch me.
Okay.
Did I ever say you? Do you fucker? Do not touch me. Get his fucking hands off me. Get your fucking hands off me.
Cool out. Hey, if you keep resisting, I'm gonna charge you with that.
Attempting to bite a police officer can very likely be charged as assault or battery on a police officer, which is a third-degree felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. What the officers are attempting to do is take away her phone and her watch so that she isn't able to contact anybody, which is within their legal right.
You know what? I'm gonna charge you with putting your fucking dirty ass hands on me.
Stop moving. Let him take off your watch.
You. You don't get to touch me. You are a disgusting piece of shit.
Also, for the record, they are perfectly allowed to lay their hands on her while she's in the process of being arrested. She doesn't seem to understand that. If Shawn had doubled down here on wanting to kill the police officer, she could have been charged with threat to kill or do bodily injury to a police officer.
The next time you fucking touch me.
Hey, get in the car.
Sit in the car.
No, he doesn't get to touch me.
Okay,
sit in the car.
Follow, use the words of what these are hands.
Hey, get in the car. If you don't, you're going to get charged with obstructing.
If
Get in
he
the car.
fucking touches me again.
Get in the car, Shawn.
Get your fucking hands off
Shawn,
me.
he's not even touching you. Get in the car.
Oh, but he
I'm not
did.
touching you.
No, he's touched me.
Get in the car,
He's
Shawn.
touched me way more times than appropriate.
Shawn, get in the car.
No, do you know what he's done? If you
Stop kicking us.
I'm gonna kick you right in the fucking sack.
That's mean. Don't do that.
Motherfucker.
Hey, pull the hobble strap out the door.
That motherfucker has touched me more times than appropriate. Do you understand?
Everyone.
Do you understand how many times he's touched me? You don't have any sort of consciousness or awareness as to why.
Stand up, Shawn.
Shawn Mullarkey was eventually brought into the station and was later charged with felony aggravated DUI, felony aggravated assault, and misdemeanor resisting arrest.
You can.
No, I can't.
You were standing outside of the car earlier, weren't you?
How can I stand up?
Then you need a security order, right?
She also received a citation for transportation or possession of open alcohol. A week later, additional charges were filed, including endangering the health or life of a child, violation of a bail bond, and resisting or obstructing a police officer. Her court case is still open, and it's very likely that she'll be sentenced to prison. And this next case is just the cherry on top when it comes to Karens. On March 30th, 2022, officers received a report of a disturbance happening inside of a local Walmart. They responded to the store around 1:30 p.m., having a report that a woman was threatening customers and staff with a brick and a knife. That woman turned out to be called Brandy McGowan, someone who already had a pretty extensive arrest record at this time.
Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop it now. Put it down. Put the knife down.
On her track record, you can find things like charges of burglary, kidnapping, battery, a slew of drug-related offenses, and soliciting without a permit. As of right now, McGowan doesn't seem to be an immediate risk. She is armed and dangerous, yes, but she doesn't appear to be out of control.
Put it down. Put the knife down. Put it down now. Put the knife down.
The officer makes the call to hold her at gunpoint while waiting for backup, instead of trying something to immediately disarm her.
Put it down. Drop it. Drop the knife. Put it down. Put the knife down. Put the knife down.
Maybe I'm the killer and I'm not.
Drop the knife. Drop the knife.
Drop the knife.
Drop the knife now. Drop the knife.
God damn it. So you're all kidnapping me? You got it? Yeah, I know I'm fixing to get cut up. But y'all get my family.
This situation is resolved relatively quickly, with the officer being able to switch to a taser once his deputy arrives. After this incident, McGowan is taken to the hospital for evaluation, where it was discovered that she had apparently ingested about 4 grams of methamphetamine earlier in the day. The knife in her hand was one that she'd actually opened up within the store, and then had started waving it around. Luckily, nobody was hurt in this altercation, and she is currently awaiting trial.